The rain came like a warning that afternoon, hammering the windows of Hartwell and Associates until even the glass seemed to flinch. I should have recognized it as an omen. The way the storm clouds gathered over Manhattan like vultures, the way the delivery man's hands shook when he handed over that package. But I was too tired to read the signs, too angry to stay silent when my boss decided to destroy a stranger's dignity for sport. I pressed my forehead against the break room window on the 42nd floor, watching the city blur through sheets of water. My reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, shoulders hunched from another 14-hour day, hunched over contracts that would make rich men richer while I survived on vending machine coffee and the promise of overtime pay that never quite covered my student loans. The elevator chimed, and Daniel Royce's voice cut through the office like a blade. "You're 20 minutes late. Do you think my time is worthless?" I turned to see a delivery man standing in our pristine lobby, water pooling at his feet from his soaked jacket. He was maybe 30, dark hair plastered to his forehead, holding a package with hands that trembled. Whether from cold or something else entirely, I couldn't tell. "The traffic was," he began. "I don't care about your excuses," Daniel snapped, loud enough for the entire floor to hear. "Next time, leave earlier, or find a job that doesn't require punctuality." The words hit me like a physical blow. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or the way the man's jaw tightened as he absorbed the humiliation in silence. Maybe it was seeing myself in his position, invisible, expendable, treated like furniture. Before I could stop myself, I stepped forward. "You don't talk to people like that." The silence that followed felt dangerous. Daniel's face flushed red, but the delivery man turned to look at me with eyes the color of storm glass. Calm, unreadable, but somehow grateful. He was taller than I'd first thought, and despite his drenched appearance, there was something about the way he carried himself that seemed careful, controlled, like he was playing a role. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. "But it's fine. I'm used to it." He signed Daniel's tablet with steady hands, steadier than they'd been moments before, and left without another word. But not before those storm glass eyes met mine one more time, holding my gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Something passed between us in that moment. Recognition, maybe. Or warning. The rest of the afternoon crawled by in a haze of depositions and discovery documents. Daniel made sure to pile extra work on my desk, his petty revenge for my moment of defiance. But I couldn't concentrate. Something about the delivery man nagged at me. The way he'd moved with quiet precision despite his apparent nervousness. The expensive watch I'd glimpsed beneath his wet sleeve. The fact that he'd seemed more amused than grateful when I'd defended him. By the time I finally escaped the office, the rain had softened to a steady drizzle, and the streets gleamed black under the streetlights. The city felt different somehow, charged with electricity that had nothing to do with the storm. Every shadow seemed deeper, every sound sharper. I was 3 blocks from my apartment when I noticed them. 2 black sedans, engines running, parked with military precision outside my building. My steps slowed as a figure emerged from the first car, tall, immaculate in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. It took me a moment to recognize him without the wet delivery uniform. The storm glass eyes were exactly the same. "Ms. Hillyer," he said, my name rolling off his tongue like he'd been practicing it, like he'd known it long before today. "We need to talk." My keys felt suddenly heavy in my hand. The street, which had been busy moments before, was now eerily empty. I'm sorry. Do I know you? His smile was polite, measured, but didn't reach his eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. You shouldn't interfere with things you don't understand. The rain continued to fall, and I realized with crystalline clarity that my small act of kindness had just changed everything. One moment of defiance. That's all it took to pull back the curtain on a world I never knew existed. A world where delivery men drove in convoys and knew your name before you gave it. A world where standing up for a stranger could be the most dangerous thing you'd ever done. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how a nobody paralegal from Queens ended up in the crosshairs of one of the most dangerous men in New York, you need to know about the rain, the delivery, and the choice that started it all. You need to know about Victoria Hillyer, the woman I was before I learned that some acts of kindness come with a price that can reshape your entire world. I'd been invisible for so long that speaking up felt like breaking a bone I'd forgotten I had. 3 years at Hartwell & Associates. 3 years of Daniel Royce treating me like expensive furniture. Useful when needed, ignored otherwise. I'd perfected the art of blending into beige walls and keeping my opinions locked behind my teeth. My mother always said I had too much mouth for my own good, but law school had beaten that out of me. Corporate America had finished the job. Until today. Until a stranger with storm glass eyes reminded me what it felt like to have a spine. The man standing beside the black sedan didn't look like any delivery driver I'd ever seen. Not anymore. The expensive cut of his suit, the way he held himself with quiet authority, the fact that he somehow knew my name, it all painted a picture I was too afraid to fully examine. I think there's been some mistake, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I don't know who you think I am, but... Victoria Hillyer, he interrupted, taking a step closer. 26 years old. Graduated Columbia Law, summa cum laude. Works at Hartwell & Associates as a paralegal, despite being overqualified for the position. Lives alone in apartment 3B. He paused, letting each detail sink in like stones dropped into still water. Daughter of Thomas Hillyer, who died in a car accident 5 years ago. The mention of my father hit me like a physical blow. How do you... Your father was a good man, he continued, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. He worked in logistics. Very thorough. Very honest. The way he said honest made it sound like a rare and dangerous quality. My hands were shaking now, and I clutched my purse tighter to hide it. What do you want? He studied me for a long moment, rain beading on his dark hair. This afternoon, you stood up for someone you didn't know, someone you thought couldn't defend himself. His lips curved in what might have been amusement. That was unexpected. It was the right thing to do. Was it? He tilted his head slightly. And if I told you that your right thing just put you on the radar of people who don't appreciate interference, would you still think it was worth it? The second sedan's door opened, and another man emerged, older, broader, with the kind of face that had seen too much and forgotten how to smile. He didn't speak, just positioned himself where he could watch both ends of the street. The casual way he scanned for threats made my stomach clench. I don't understand what's happening, I whispered. No, the man agreed. You don't. But you will. He reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a business card. Plain white, expensive paper, with only a phone number embossed in black. My name is Venerando Russo. When you're ready to understand what your father really did for a living, call me. I stared at the card like it might burst into flames. My father worked for a shipping company. He moved cargo containers. He did. Venerando's smile was sharp as broken glass. The question is, what was in those containers, and why did someone want him dead for knowing? The world tilted sideways. He died in an accident. The police said. The police say many things. He stepped back toward his car, but his eyes never left mine. Your father kept records, Victoria. Very detailed records. And now, because you couldn't keep your mouth shut today, certain people are wondering if he passed those records on to his daughter. Terror and confusion warred in my chest. I don't have any records. I don't know anything about. I believe you. His hand was on the car door now. But belief is a luxury in my world. Facts are what keep people alive. He paused, rain dripping from his hair onto his collar. You have 48 hours to decide if you want to learn the truth about Thomas Hillyer or if you'd prefer to keep living in ignorance. Either way, we'll be watching. The car door slammed with the finality of a coffin lid. Both sedans pulled away from the curb in perfect synchronization, leaving me standing alone on the sidewalk with rain soaking through my jacket and a business card burning in my palm. I looked up at my apartment building, the same brick facade I'd called home for 2 years, the same chipped paint on the front door, the same flickering streetlight that the city never bothered to fix. Everything looked exactly the same. But I knew with bone-deep certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. My father had been dead for 5 years. I'd grieved him, buried him, moved on with my life. But apparently, Thomas Hillyer's secrets had been waiting in the dark all this time, patient as predators. And now they'd found me. I climbed the 3 flights to my apartment on unsteady legs, double-locked the door behind me, and sat on my second-hand couch with Venerando Russo's card in my trembling hands. The phone number stared back at me, 10 digits that felt like a doorway to a world I'd never wanted to enter. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the city clean while my carefully constructed life crumbled like sand. 48 hours to decide. The clock on my wall ticked past midnight, and I realized that time had already started running out. Subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow's story unfolds darker, deeper, and far more dangerous than you think. Now, let's begin the tale. I didn't sleep. How could I? Every creak of the building, every car door slamming on the street below, every shadow that moved past my window sent my heart hammering against my ribs. I sat curled on my couch until dawn. Venerando Russo's business card balanced on my knee like a loaded gun. By the time my alarm went off at 6:30, I'd convinced myself it had all been some elaborate nightmare. Exhaustion could make you hallucinate, couldn't it? Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, the confrontation, the sedans, the impossible knowledge of my father's secrets. But the card was real. The embossed numbers caught the morning light streaming through my blinds, and I knew that whatever had started yesterday was far from over. I dressed mechanically. The same gray suit I wore every Tuesday, the same sensible flats that wouldn't slip on marble floors. If my world was falling apart, at least I could look professional while it happened. The subway ride to Midtown felt surreal. Commuters pressed around me, lost in their phones and coffee cups, completely unaware that one of them had apparently inherited a dead man's dangerous secrets. I caught my reflection in the train window, pale, hollow-eyed, but still recognizably Victoria Hillyer, paralegal. Still invisible. The first sign that something was wrong came when I stepped off the elevator on the 42nd floor. The usual morning chaos was replaced by an eerie quiet. Lawyers huddled in small groups, whispering like mourners at a funeral. The receptionist's desk was empty, her computer screen dark. Victoria. Sarah from accounting grabbed my arm as I passed. Did you hear? Someone bought the firm overnight. Just bought the whole thing. My blood turned to ice water. What do you mean, bought it? Anonymous investor. Paid cash, apparently. The partners are in emergency meetings and... She lowered her voice to a whisper. Daniel's been fired. Security escorted him out an hour ago. The hallway seemed to tilt around me. This couldn't be coincidence. Not after last night. Not after Venerando's cryptic warnings about interference and consequences. I made it to my cubicle on autopilot, but something was wrong there too. My nameplate was gone. In its place, a small brass sign read, V. Hillyer, Senior Legal Consultant. The title I'd dreamed of for 3 years, handed to me like a poisoned gift. Congratulations. I spun around to find Marcus Webb, one of the senior partners, standing behind me with an expression I couldn't read. I'm sorry? Your promotion. Effective immediately. He handed me a sealed envelope, cream-colored paper that felt expensive between my fingers. The new ownership specifically requested you for a special project. You're to report to the Meridian Hotel at noon for a briefing. My hand shook as I opened the envelope. Inside, elegant handwriting on matching stationery. Lunch, today, the Meridian Hotel, penthouse suite. Come alone. VR. Who is the new owner? I asked, though I already knew the answer would change nothing. Marcus shrugged, but there was tension in his shoulders. Anonymous holding company. Very private, very well funded. They seem to know exactly what they want. His eyes met mine. Including you. The morning crawled by in a haze of whispered conversations and nervous energy. Lawyers who'd ignored me for 3 years suddenly wanted to know about my connections and how I'd managed to catch the new owner's attention. I deflected their questions with the same skill I'd once used to deflect Daniel's abuse, but inside, panic was building like pressure in a sealed container. At 11:30, I stood in the bathroom mirror, trying to make myself look like someone who deserved a promotion instead of someone who'd stumbled into a nightmare. My reflection stared back, pale and frightened, and I wondered if this was how my father had felt when his careful, honest life had collided with forces beyond his control. The Meridian Hotel rose from the Manhattan skyline like a glass and steel monument to wealth. I'd walked past it 1,000 times, but never imagined I'd have reason to enter its marble lobby. The elevator to the penthouse required a special key card, which the concierge handed me with the kind of deference usually reserved for royalty. The doors opened directly into a suite that could have housed my entire apartment building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and I realized with a start that I could see my office building from here. Had Venerando been watching me work all this time? You came. I turned to find him standing by the windows, no longer the rain-soaked delivery man or the threatening figure from last night. Today he wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my annual salary, and his dark hair was perfectly styled. But those storm-glass eyes were exactly the same. Did I have a choice? I asked. There's always a choice. He gestured to a small dining table set for 2. Please sit. You must be hungry. I remained standing. You bought my company. I bought a law firm that was hemorrhaging money and treating its employees poorly. He moved to pour wine from a bottle I couldn't pronounce. The fact that you work there was convenient. Convenient for what? For this conversation. He set a glass in front of the empty chair. The one where I explain why your father died and why you're in danger. My legs gave out, and I sank into the chair before I could stop myself. You said he kept records. Thomas Hillyer was the most honest man I ever met. Venerando sat across from me, his movements precise and controlled. He worked for one of my shipping companies, and he noticed discrepancies, cargo that didn't match manifests, containers that disappeared from official records. He started documenting everything. What kind of cargo? The kind that certain people would kill to keep secret. His smile was sharp as winter. Your father was going to expose them, so they arranged an accident. The wine glass trembled in my hands. Why are you telling me this? Because yesterday you stood up for someone you thought was powerless. You showed the same moral courage that got your father killed. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. People who stand up when no one's watching are rare, Victoria. I wanted to see which kind you are. And now I'm offering you a choice. Work for me, help me finish what your father started, and I'll protect you from the people who killed him. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Or walk away and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. I stared at him across the table, this dangerous man who'd turned my world upside down in less than 24 hours. What makes you think I'll say yes? His smile was patient, predatory. Because you're Thomas Hillyer's daughter, and you'll want justice for what they did to him. Outside the windows, the city sprawled beneath us like a chessboard, and I realized I was no longer just a pawn in someone else's game. I was about to become a player. I said no. Of course I said no. What sane person accepts a job offer from a man who speaks about murder like discussing the weather? I walked out of that penthouse suite with my chin up and my hands steady, determined to pretend the last 48 hours had been nothing more than an elaborate fever dream. That resolve lasted exactly 3 days. On Friday morning, I arrived at Hartwell & Associates to find my cubicle had been replaced by an office. Not just any office, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of Central Park that probably cost more per month than my entire salary. My name was already on the door in elegant gold lettering. Victoria Hillyer, Senior Legal Consultant. "Congratulations," said Elena Martinez, the firm's new managing partner. She'd appeared overnight, like everything else in my suddenly transformed world. Tall, sharp-suited, with the kind of confidence that came from never having to ask permission for anything. "Mr. Russo was very specific about your accommodations." I didn't accept his offer. Elena's smile was polite and utterly unmoved. "Your employment contract suggests otherwise. Salary increase of 300%, full benefits, and a very generous signing bonus that's already been deposited into your account." She handed me a tablet displaying my bank balance. The number made my knees weak. "I never signed anything." "The digital signature from your company email account says differently." Elena's tone remained pleasant, but her eyes were steel. "I'm sure it's just an oversight. These things happen when people are overwhelmed by good fortune." I stared at the tablet, at the impossible sum of money that had appeared in my account like magic, or like a trap. What exactly am I supposed to be consulting on? Maritime shipping contracts primarily, import-export documentation. Very routine work for someone with your qualifications. Elena gestured toward my new office. "Your first assignment is already waiting." The office was beautiful in the way that expensive things often are, all clean lines and subtle luxury. The mahogany desk could have doubled as a dining table, and the leather chair probably cost more than my monthly rent. But it felt like a cage, albeit a gilded one. The assignment Elena had mentioned sat in the center of my desk. A thick folder marked Russo Holdings, Port Authority Contracts. I opened it with trembling fingers, half expecting to find evidence of whatever illegal cargo my father had died trying to expose. Instead, I found exactly what Elena had promised: routine shipping contracts, customs documentation, and import manifests for what appeared to be a legitimate international trade business. Everything was meticulously organized, professionally prepared, and completely legal, which somehow made it more terrifying than if I'd found smoking guns and blood money. I spent the morning reviewing contracts for textile imports from Italy, wine shipments from France, and electronics from South Korea. Normal business for a normal company, conducted by people who definitely weren't normal. Every document bore Venerando's signature, bold, confident strokes that seemed to leap off the page. By lunch, I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. Maybe Russo Holdings really was just a shipping company. Maybe Venerando's interest in me was purely professional. Maybe my father's death had been exactly what the police said: a tragic accident on a rainy night. Then I found the anomaly. It was buried in the third contract, hidden among pages of standard legal language. A clause authorizing the transport of specialized cargo requiring discreet handling and non-standard documentation. The kind of vague language that could mean anything or nothing, depending on who was reading it. I was still staring at the clause when my computer chimed with a new email. No sender name, just a string of numbers I didn't recognize. The subject line made my blood freeze. "You're learning." The message was brief. "Conference room B, now. Come alone." Conference room B was on the executive floor, a space I'd never had reason to visit during my 3 years as a nobody paralegal. The elevator ride felt like ascending to my own execution. When the doors opened, I found myself face to face with a man I didn't recognize, older than Venerando, with silver hair and the kind of face that had seen too much violence to ever look truly peaceful. "Ms. Hillyer." His voice carried a slight accent, Italian maybe. "I am Salvatore Torino, Mr. Russo's associate. Please, sit." The conference room was all glass and chrome, with a view of the city that made me feel like I was floating above the world. Salvatore took the seat across from me, his movements careful and deliberate. "You found the clause," he said. It wasn't a question. "I don't know what you're talking about." His smile was patient, almost grandfatherly. "The discrete cargo provision in the Port Authority contract. You've been staring at it for 23 minutes. The casual surveillance in his tone made my skin crawl. "Are you watching me?" "We're protecting you. There's a difference." Salvatore leaned forward, his expression growing serious. "Your father discovered that some of our competitors were using our shipping routes for unauthorized purposes. Drugs, weapons, human trafficking. He tried to expose them." "And you killed him for it?" "We tried to save him." The pain in Salvatore's voice sounded genuine. Thomas was a good man, but he didn't understand the rules of this world. He thought the police would protect him. He thought justice mattered more than survival. I felt tears burning behind my eyes. "So you let them murder him?" "We were too late." Salvatore's hands clenched into fists on the table. "But we're not too late for you." "What does that mean?" "It means the same people who killed your father know you're asking questions. It means they're watching you just like we are, but with very different intentions." He slid a photograph across the table. "This was taken outside your apartment building this morning." The image showed a man in a dark coat standing across from my building, his face partially obscured by shadows. But I could see enough to know he didn't belong in my neighborhood. Too well dressed, too alert, too dangerous. "Who is he?" Someone who works for people who don't believe in second chances. Salvatore retrieved the photograph. Mr. Russo is offering you protection, Ms. Hillyer, but protection requires trust, and trust requires honesty. About what? About whether you're your father's daughter in more ways than one. His eyes searched my face. About whether you're brave enough to finish what he started. The conference room fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic 40 floors below. Through the windows, I could see the city spreading out like a vast game board, full of players whose rules I was only beginning to understand. What happens if I say no? Salvatore's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Then you go home tonight, and we hope our competitors are feeling merciful. The choice, I realized, had never really been mine at all. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I sat in my new office until the cleaning crew arrived, staring at shipping manifests that might as well have been written in code. Every shadow beyond my windows looked like a threat. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. Salvatore's photograph had burned itself into my memory. The man in the dark coat, watching my building with the patience of a predator. When I finally left the office at midnight, a black sedan was waiting at the curb. The driver didn't speak, just held the door open like this was perfectly normal. Like I'd already made my choice without realizing it. The car delivered me to a brownstone on the Upper East Side that looked like old money and older secrets. Venerando was waiting in what appeared to be a study, surrounded by leather-bound books and the kind of antique furniture that belonged in museums. He'd traded his business suit for dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, but somehow looked more dangerous in casual clothes than he had in armor of expensive fabric. "You didn't go home," he observed, pouring amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "Your associate made it clear that wouldn't be wise." Salvatore has a gift for understatement. Venerando handed me a glass of what smelled like whiskey aged longer than I'd been alive. "He also has a gift for keeping people alive." I took a sip and felt fire trace down my throat. "Is that what you did for my father? Kept him alive?" Something flickered across Venerando's face. Pain, maybe, or regret. "I tried. Thomas was stubborn. He believed the system would protect him if he just followed the rules. And you don't believe in the system. I believe in results." He moved to a wall safe hidden behind a painting of the Italian countryside. "Your father kept meticulous records. Every discrepancy, every suspicious shipment, every piece of evidence that our competitors were using Russo Holdings as cover for their operations." The safe opened with a soft click, revealing stacks of documents and what looked like several external hard drives. Venerando pulled out a leather portfolio and set it on the desk between us. He documented everything for 18 months before they discovered what he was doing. Venerando's voice was quiet, almost reverent. Even then, he refused our offer of protection. Said he had a daughter to think about, that he couldn't disappear into our world. My hand shook as I opened the portfolio. The first page was a handwritten note in my father's careful script. "For Victoria? If something happens to me, these people will help you understand why. Trust VR, he's one of the good ones. Love, Dad." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. He knew he was going to die. He knew the risks, but he also knew that someone had to stop what was happening. Venerando sat across from me, his expression unreadable. "Children were being trafficked through our shipping routes, Victoria. Drugs were flowing into schools and neighborhoods. Your father couldn't live with that knowledge and do nothing." I turned the page and found photographs. Shipping containers being loaded at night. Men in expensive suits shaking hands in shadowy warehouses, manifests with obvious discrepancies highlighted in my father's red ink. It was a catalog of corruption that stretched from the docks of New York to ports across 3 continents. "The Castellis," I whispered, recognizing a name from one of the documents. "You know that name?" "My ex-boyfriend mentioned them once. Said he was doing work for people called Castelli." The memory felt like a lifetime ago, back when my biggest worry was unpaid bills and a deadbeat ex. Mike always claimed he was about to come into serious money. Venerando's expression hardened. "What kind of work?" "I don't know. He was always secretive about his jobs." I flipped through more pages, seeing my father's life's work spread out like evidence in a trial. "Are they the ones who killed him?" "The Castellis are old-school mafia, but they're not stupid enough to kill a federal witness directly." Venerando's voice carried the weight of experience. "They contracted it out, made it look like an accident. But you know who actually did it?" "I know many things, Victoria. The question is whether you're prepared to know them too." I closed the portfolio, my father's final message still echoing in my mind. "Trust VR. He's one of the good ones." "What do you want from me?" "I want to finish what Thomas started. The evidence he gathered is enough to bring down the Castelli operation, but only if we can prove the connections he documented." Venerando leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You're a lawyer. You understand evidence chains, legal procedures. You could help us build a case that would actually stick. Why not just go to the FBI? Because half the FBI is on the Castelli payroll, and the other half wouldn't believe us, without ironclad proof." His smile was bitter. "Your father learned that lesson the hard way." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that seemed to stretch forever. Somewhere out there, the man in the dark coat was probably still watching my empty apartment. Somewhere out there, the people who'd killed my father were sleeping peacefully in their beds, confident that their secrets were safe. "If I help you," I said finally, "what happens to me afterward? Do I get my life back?" "That depends on what kind of life you want." Venerando joined me at the window, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtly dangerous. "You could go back to being invisible, filing other people's paperwork, and pretending the world is fair. Or you could help me make sure no other father dies for trying to do the right thing." The choice felt impossible and inevitable at the same time. I thought about my father, working late nights to document crimes he could have easily ignored. I thought about the children being trafficked through shipping routes, the drugs flowing into communities, the corruption that festered in shadows while good people looked the other way. "There's something else," Venerando said quietly. "Something I haven't told you." I turned to face him, and the expression in his storm-glass eyes made my breath catch. "Your father saved my life once, a long time ago, when I was young and stupid and thought I was invincible." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I owe him a debt I can never repay, but maybe I can repay it to his daughter." The weight of legacy settled on my shoulders like a mantle I'd never asked to wear. My father's courage, his moral certainty, his willingness to risk everything for strangers he'd never meet. "Show me everything," I said. "Every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence he died to protect." Venerando's smile was sharp as a blade, but for the first time since this nightmare began, it felt like hope. I woke up in silk sheets that probably cost more than my monthly rent, in a bedroom I didn't remember entering. Panic shot through me like electricity until the previous night came flooding back, the documents, the revelations, the choice I'd made to help Venerando finish my father's work. I must have fallen asleep in his study, exhausted by grief and whiskey and the weight of inherited secrets. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing a view of Central Park that belonged in magazines. This wasn't the brownstone from last night. This was something else entirely, a fortress of glass and steel suspended above the city like a modern Olympus. "You're awake." Venerando's voice came from the doorway, and I pulled the silk sheets up to my chin, suddenly aware that someone had changed me out of my work clothes and into an oversized t-shirt that smelled like expensive cologne. "Where am I?" "My penthouse. You were exhausted, and it wasn't safe to take you home." He moved into the room carrying a tray with coffee and what looked like actual croissants, not the stale pastries from the office break room. "Your apartment building was being watched by 3 different surveillance teams when we drove by." The casual way he mentioned surveillance teams made my stomach clench. "3? Castellas, FBI, and someone else we haven't identified yet." He set the tray on the bedside table, his movements precise and controlled. "You've become quite popular since yesterday." I accepted the coffee gratefully, needing the caffeine to process this new reality. The penthouse stretched beyond the bedroom in all directions, minimalist furniture, abstract art, and enough space to house a small village. It was beautiful in the way that money could make anything beautiful, but it felt like a cage made of marble and gold. "How long do I have to stay here?" "Until we neutralize the threats against you." Venerando sat in a chair by the window, close enough to talk but far enough to avoid crowding me. "Could be days. Could be weeks. I have a job. A life. You have a target on your back." His voice was patient but firm. "The moment you walked into that conference room with Salvatore, you became a player in a game where the stakes are life and death." I pulled my knees up to my chest, feeling small and lost in the enormous bed. "I didn't ask for this. Neither did your father." Venerando's expression softened slightly. "But sometimes the right thing chooses us, whether we're ready or not." The next few hours passed in a blur of luxury and frustration. Venerando's penthouse was equipped with everything I could possibly need. A wardrobe full of clothes in my exact size, a fully stocked kitchen, a library that could rival most universities. But every window was bulletproof. Every door required a key card, and men in expensive suits patrolled the lobby 40 floors below. "You see a cage," Venerando said when he found me staring out at the city that evening. "I see the safest place in a city built on wolves." "Same thing, isn't it?" I didn't turn around, watching traffic crawl through the streets like blood cells through arteries. A cage is still a cage, even if it's made of gold. "Is it?" He joined me at the window, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Or is it a fortress where you can choose your battles, instead of having them chosen for you?" I finally looked at him, this dangerous man who'd turned my world upside down in less than a week. In the evening light, he looked younger somehow, less like the untouchable crime lord, and more like someone who carried too many secrets for one person to bear. "Tell me about my father," I said. "Not the documents or the evidence. Tell me about the man you knew." Venerando was quiet for so long, I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "I was 22 when I met Thomas. Young, angry, convinced that violence was the only language the world understood. He poured himself a drink from the bar cart, but didn't offer me one. I'd just taken over my father's business, and I thought that meant I had to be harder, colder, more ruthless than anyone who came before me. What changed?" Your father caught me beating a man who'd stolen from one of our shipments. Nothing major, a few cases of wine, maybe $1,000 worth. But I was going to kill him for it, because that's what I thought strength looked like." Venerando's laugh was bitter. Thomas stepped between us, this middle-aged logistics coordinator, standing up to a man with a gun because he couldn't watch someone die over wine. I could picture it perfectly. My father's quiet courage, his inability to look away when someone needed help, the same instinct that had gotten him killed. He talked to me for 3 hours that night, about justice versus vengeance, about the difference between fear and respect, about what kind of man I wanted to be when I looked in the mirror. Venerando's eyes met mine. He saved that thief's life. But more than that, he saved mine. And you've been trying to repay him ever since. I've been trying to be worthy of his faith in me." He moved to the balcony door, stepping out into the cool evening air. "Some days I succeed. Others—" I followed him outside, where the city spread below us like a constellation of possibilities and dangers. The wind was sharp at this height, carrying the scent of rain and exhaust, and 8 million lives being lived in the spaces between skyscrapers. "There's something else," Venerando said, not looking at me. "Something I should have told you from the beginning." My heart started racing. "What?" "The night your father died, he called me, said he was scared, that he thought someone was following him." Venerando's hands gripped the balcony railing until his knuckles went white. "I told him to come to me, that I'd protect him. But he said he couldn't risk leading them to my people. So he went home instead. The words came out like a confession. If I'd insisted, if I'd sent men to get him whether he wanted protection or not, he'd still be alive. Maybe. Venerando finally looked at me, and I saw something raw and vulnerable in his storm glass eyes. "I've carried that guilt for 5 years, Victoria. Every decision I've made since then has been about honoring his memory." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall. We stood there in the growing storm, 2 people bound together by grief and legacy, and the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. "I'm not my father," I said finally. "No," Venerando agreed. "You're stronger than he was, and that terrifies me." 3 days in paradise, and I was losing my mind. Venerando's penthouse had everything except the one thing I needed most: freedom. I'd read. Half his library, worn a rotation of designer clothes that fit me perfectly, a detail I tried not to think about too hard, and memorized every angle of the city view from 40 floors up. But I was still a prisoner, albeit one with Egyptian cotton sheets and a personal chef. The breaking point came on Thursday morning when I found Venerando in his study, surrounded by men in expensive suits who fell silent the moment I entered. The conversation had the weight of violence about it. Hushed tones, tense postures, hands that moved too close to concealed weapons. "I need to go to work," I announced, ignoring the way every man in the room turned to assess me as a potential threat. "That's not possible," Venerando said without looking up from the documents spread across his desk. "I have cases to review, deadlines to meet. People will notice if I just disappear. People will notice if you're dead." His voice carried the kind of finality that ended arguments, but I was past caring about his authority. "This is insane. I can't live like this." Finally, he looked at me, and something dangerous flickered in his storm glass eyes. "Gentlemen, give us a moment." The suits filed out with the silent efficiency of men accustomed to following orders without question. When the door closed behind them, Venerando stood and moved to the window, his movements controlled but tense. "There was an incident last night," he said. "Someone tried to break into your apartment." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of incident?" "The kind that left blood on your fire escape and a message carved into your door." He turned to face me, his expression grim. "They know you're not there, Victoria. They know you're under my protection, and they're getting desperate." "What did the message say?" "We know what Daddy told you." The words hung in the air like smoke. "They think your father passed information directly to you before he died." I sank into one of the leather chairs, feeling the weight of inherited danger settling on my shoulders. "But he didn't. I never knew anything about his work until you told me." "I know that. You know that. But they don't." Venerando moved to his desk and pulled out a tablet, swiping to a news article. This morning's headlines. The screen showed a photograph of Russo Holdings' main office building, with police cars and federal agents swarming the entrance. The headline read, "FBI raids shipping empire in massive corruption probe." "Someone leaked the investigation," Venerando said, his voice deadly quiet. "Someone with access to federal files, someone who knew exactly which documents would cause the most damage." I scanned the article, my legal training automatically cataloging the implications. "This is bad. This is war." He took the tablet back, his jaw tight with controlled fury. "Whoever leaked this information just painted a target on every person connected to Russo Holdings, including you. But I'm not really connected to... You're living in my penthouse, working in an office I provided, carrying evidence that could destroy the Castelli operation." His laugh was bitter. "You're connected whether you want to be or not." The study door opened, and Salvatore entered without knocking, a breach of protocol that spoke to the urgency of whatever news he carried. "We have a problem," he said, his accent thicker than usual. "The leak came from inside." Venerando went very still. "Explain." "The documents the FBI received, they're copies of files from our own servers. Someone with high-level access fed them information about our legitimate operations to make the illegal ones look more credible." Salvatore's expression was grim. "It's a setup, designed to make us look guilty while protecting the real criminals. Who has that level of access?" "Besides you? Maybe 6 people." Salvatore's eyes flicked to me, then back to Venerando. "All of them have been with the organization for years. All of them have families, assets, reasons to stay loyal." "All of them except one," Venerando said quietly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I watched the 2 men communicate in the kind of shorthand that came from years of shared violence and mutual trust, and I realized they were talking about someone specific. "Who?" I asked. "Marco Benedetti," Salvatore said. "My nephew. He's been handling our digital security for the past 2 years." "Family," Venerando said, and the word sounded like a curse. "Family with gambling debts and a cocaine habit he thinks we don't know about." Salvatore's voice carried the weight of personal betrayal. "The Castellis probably offered him enough money to disappear, start over somewhere else." I thought about the implications. A trusted insider selling information to the enemy, federal agents building cases on manufactured evidence, and somewhere in the middle of it all, my father's real evidence getting buried under layers of legal misdirection. "What do we do?" I asked. "We find Marco before the FBI does," Venerando said, "and we make sure he tells us exactly what he gave them and what he held back. And then?" The look that passed between Venerando and Salvatore answered that question without words. In their world, betrayal had only one punishment. "I want to help," I said, surprising myself with the words. Absolutely not. Venerando's response was immediate and non-negotiable. I'm a lawyer. I understand evidence chains, legal procedures. If Marco gave them my father's documents, I need to know what they have and what they don't. You need to stay here, where it's safe. Safe? I stood up, anger finally overriding fear. I've been safe for 3 days while my life falls apart. My apartment is compromised, my job is probably gone, and federal agents are building a case that could destroy any chance of getting justice for my father. Victoria. No. I moved to face him directly, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his storm glass eyes. You said I was stronger than my father. Prove it. Let me help you fix this. For a long moment, we stared at each other across the space between safety and danger, between protection and partnership. Finally, Venerando nodded. Find Marco, he told Salvatore. Set up a meeting, somewhere public, somewhere he'll feel safe enough to talk. And her? Salvatore gestured toward me. She comes with us. Venerando's smile was sharp as broken glass. It's time Victoria learned how this game is really played. Outside the windows, storm clouds gathered over Manhattan, and I realized that my comfortable cage was about to become a battlefield. The meeting with Marco was supposed to happen at a coffee shop in Soho. Neutral ground, public enough to feel safe, crowded enough to discourage violence. We never made it that far. I was in the back of Venerando's armored sedan, reviewing legal documents on my tablet while he spoke in rapid Italian to someone on his encrypted phone. Salvatore rode in the passenger seat, his eyes constantly scanning the street through tinted windows. The morning traffic moved with typical Manhattan sluggishness, giving me time to prepare for my first real glimpse into how Venerando's world operated. Marco's scared, Salvatore reported after ending his own call. Keeps asking for guarantees that we just want a talk. He should be scared, Venerando replied, his voice carrying the kind of cold certainty that made my skin crawl. Betraying family is the one sin that doesn't get forgiven. I was about to ask what exactly that meant when our driver's voice crackled through the intercom. We've got company, 3 cars, moving to box us in. Through the rear window, I could see black SUVs weaving through traffic with predatory precision. They moved like a pack, coordinated and purposeful, closing the distance between us with mechanical efficiency. Castellis? Salvatore asked, his hand moving inside his jacket. Has to be. Venerando's phone was already in his hand, fingers flying over the screen. They must have intercepted our communications about Marco. The first impact came from behind, a controlled collision that sent our sedan lurching forward into the intersection. Our driver fought for control as pedestrians scattered and horns blared around us. The second impact came from the side, a black SUV ramming into my door with enough force to spider the bulletproof glass. "Get down!" Salvatore shouted, but I was already moving, my legal training forgotten in favor of pure survival instinct. The third SUV blocked our path forward, and suddenly we were trapped in a triangle of steel and violence in the middle of Broadway. Men in tactical gear poured out of the vehicles, their faces hidden behind masks, their weapons held with professional competence. "Victoria, stay behind me," Venerando ordered, his own gun appearing in his hand like magic. "Whatever happens, don't let them separate us." But it was already too late. Something small and metallic flew through the shattered passenger window. A canister that began hissing white smoke the moment it hit the floor. The world went hazy, then dark, and the last thing I remembered was Venerando's voice shouting my name as strong hands dragged me from the wreckage. I woke up in a warehouse that smelled like rust and fear. My hands were zip-tied to a metal chair, and my head felt like someone had used it for batting practice. The space around me was vast and empty, filled with shadows and the distant sound of water dripping. Industrial windows high above let in weak afternoon light, telling me I'd been unconscious for hours. "She's awake." The voice came from somewhere behind me, accented but not Italian. Eastern European, maybe Russian. Footsteps echoed across concrete as 3 men emerged from the shadows. The leader was tall and lean, with the kind of pale eyes that belonged on a predator. His companions flanked him like bookends, muscle in expensive suits, the kind of men who broke bones for a living. "Ms. Hillyer," the leader said, pulling up a chair to sit directly in front of me. "My name is Dmitry Volkov. I work for people who are very interested in what your father told you before he died." "I already explained this to your friends," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "My father didn't tell me anything." "Yes, so you've said. But you see, we have a problem." Dmitry leaned forward, his pale eyes studying my face like he was reading a book. "Your father kept very detailed records of our business arrangements, records that could cause significant problems for my employers." "Then you should have thought of that before you killed him." Dmitry's smile was thin as a blade. "We didn't kill Thomas Hillyer. That was the Castelli's mistake. Crude, obvious, unnecessary. We prefer more elegant solutions. Like kidnapping his daughter. Like offering his daughter a choice." He stood and began pacing around my chair, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. "You see, we know that Venerando Russo has been filling your head with stories about justice and revenge. Very romantic, very appealing to someone with your moral sensibilities." I kept my mouth shut, remembering my father's courage under pressure. "But here's what Mr. Russo hasn't told you," Dmitry continued. "Your father's records don't just implicate the Castellis, they implicate everyone, including Russo Holdings, including the man you've been sleeping with." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's not true, isn't it?" Dmitry pulled out a tablet and swiped to a document I recognized, one of my father's shipping manifests, but with different details highlighted. "Look at the signatures, Ms. Hillyer. Look at who authorized these particular shipments." I stared at the screen, my legal training automatically analyzing what I was seeing. The manifest showed a shipment of agricultural equipment from Romania to New York, but the weight and dimensions didn't match any farming machinery I'd ever heard of. And there, at the bottom of the authorization chain, was a signature I'd seen dozens of times in the past week. V. Russo. "Venerando was part of it," I whispered. "Venerando was the architect of it." Dmitry's voice carried the satisfaction of a man delivering a killing blow. "The human trafficking operation your father died trying to expose? It was Russo's idea from the beginning. The Castellis were just the muscle." My world tilted sideways. Everything I thought I knew about Venerando, about my father's death, about the choice I'd made to help seek justice, crumbled like sand. "You're lying." "Am I?" Dmitry sat back down, his pale eyes never leaving my face. "Then explain why Russo never went to the authorities with your father's evidence. Explain why he's kept you isolated, dependent on him for information. Explain why a man who claims to want justice has spent 5 years doing nothing about your father's murder." I couldn't. The questions hung in the air like accusations, and I realized how little I actually knew about the man I'd been trusting with my life. "What do you want?" I asked finally. "The same thing everyone wants, Ms. Hillyer. The truth." Dmitri leaned forward again, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Your father hid copies of his evidence somewhere safe. We know this because he told someone before he died, someone he trusted completely. He didn't tell me anything. No, but he told someone who would tell you when the time was right. Dmitri's smile was patient, predatory. We're going to wait here together until you remember who that someone was, and then you're going to call them. Outside the warehouse windows, the sun was setting over a city that suddenly felt very far away. Somewhere out there, Venerando was probably looking for me. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't sure I wanted to be found. The explosion came at dawn. I'd been tied to that chair for 12 hours, refusing to give Dmitri the answers he wanted because I genuinely didn't have them. My father had been many things, careful, methodical, protective, but he'd never been the type to burden his daughter with dangerous secrets. Whatever backup plan he'd made, he'd kept it to himself. Dmitri was losing patience. His questions had grown sharper, his threats more specific, and I could see violence building behind his pale eyes like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. When the warehouse windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and fire, part of me thought I was hallucinating from exhaustion and fear. Then I heard the gunfire. "Get her!" Dmitri shouted to his men, but they were already moving, dragging my chair toward what looked like a service exit at the back of the warehouse. Through the smoke and chaos, I caught glimpses of figures in tactical gear, rappelling through the shattered windows, a coordinated assault that spoke of military precision and unlimited resources. One of Dmitri's men cut my zip ties, hauling me to my feet with bruising force. "Move!" But we didn't make it 10 steps before the service door exploded off its hinges. The man holding me spun toward the threat, his gun rising, and that's when I saw him. Venerando moved through the smoke like an avenging angel, his expensive suit replaced by tactical gear that made him look like something out of a nightmare. The gun in his hand spoke with mechanical precision, and Dmitri's man crumpled without firing a shot. "Victoria!" His voice cut through the chaos, and I stumbled toward him on legs that barely remembered how to work. "Behind you!" I screamed as Dmitri appeared from the smoke, his own weapon trained on Venerando's back. Venerando spun and fired in one fluid motion. Dmitri's shot went wide, shattering concrete where Venerando's head had been a split second before. Dmitri himself wasn't so lucky. He hit the warehouse floor and didn't get back up. "Are you hurt?" Venerando's hands were on my face, my arms, checking for injuries with the kind of desperate intensity that spoke to genuine fear. "I'm okay," I managed, though I wasn't sure that was true. "How did you find me?" "Salvatore." His smile was sharp as broken glass. "Turns out Marco wasn't the only one with gambling debts. One of Dmitri's men owed money to the wrong people, and those people owe favors to us." More gunfire echoed from the front of the warehouse, but it was sporadic now. Clean-up work rather than pitched battle. Venerando's people had won, and won decisively. "We need to go," he said, wrapping an arm around my waist to support my unsteady legs. "This place will be crawling with police in 10 minutes. The ride back to his penthouse passed in a blur of adrenaline and exhaustion. I sat pressed against Venerando's side in the back of an armored SUV, his arm around my shoulders, his voice a low murmur as he spoke to his people on encrypted phones. The familiar weight of his presence should have been comforting, but Dmitri's words kept echoing in my mind. Venerando was the architect of it. The human trafficking operation your father died trying to expose, it was Russo's idea from the beginning. By the time we reached the penthouse, I'd made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. I need to ask you something, I said as soon as we were alone in his study, and I need you to tell me the truth. Venerando was pouring himself a drink with hands that shook almost imperceptibly, the only sign that the warehouse raid had affected him at all. Ask. Were you involved in the trafficking operation my father discovered? The glass froze halfway to his lips. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic 40 floors below. When he finally looked at me, his storm glass eyes held something I'd never seen before. Guilt. Yes, he said quietly. The word hit me like a physical blow. Dmitri was telling the truth. Dmitri was telling part of the truth. Venerando set down his drink and moved to the window, his back to me. 5 years ago, I was a different man. Younger, angrier, convinced that the only way to survive in this world was to be more ruthless than everyone else. So you trafficked human beings. I provided shipping routes and documentation for people who trafficked human beings. His voice was steady, but I could hear the self-loathing underneath. I told myself I was just moving cargo. I didn't ask questions about what was in the containers. Until my father made you ask questions. Until your father showed me photographs. Venerando turned to face me, and I saw raw pain in his expression. Children, Victoria. Dozens of them, packed into shipping containers like livestock. Your father had been documenting everything for months, building a case that would have destroyed everyone involved, including you, especially me. He moved closer, his movements careful, like he was approaching a wounded animal. Thomas could have turned me into the FBI, could have used my involvement to make his case ironclad. Instead, he gave me a choice. What kind of choice? Help him stop it, or he'd make sure I went down with everyone else. Venerando's laugh was bitter, but that wasn't really why I said yes. I said yes because he showed me what I'd become, what I'd been pretending not to see. I stared at him, this dangerous man who'd saved my life and lied to me in equal measure. So you helped him gather evidence against your own partners. I helped him gather evidence against the Castellis and the Russians, people who were using my shipping network without my knowledge for things I'd never agreed to. His eyes met mine. The trafficking operation was real, Victoria, but it wasn't mine. I was just convenient. And when the Castellis found out what you were doing, they killed your father to send me a message. Stop interfering or face the consequences. Venerando's hands clenched into fists. I should have protected him better, should have insisted he disappear until we could build the case properly. But you didn't. But I didn't. And Thomas Hillyer died because I was too proud to admit I needed help. He moved to his desk and pulled out a familiar leather portfolio, my father's evidence, the documents that had started this whole nightmare. I've spent 5 years trying to finish what he started, trying to honor his memory by destroying the people who killed him. And me? I asked. Where do I fit into your guilt-driven crusade? You were supposed to be protected, hidden away somewhere safe while I handled the dangerous work. His smile was sad and self-aware. But you're too much like your father, too brave for your own good. I looked at the portfolio, at the evidence my father had died to protect, at the man who'd been carrying that burden for 5 years. The anger I'd been nursing since Dmitri's revelations was still there, but it was complicated now by understanding. What happens next? I asked. Next, we finish this. Venerando opened the portfolio, revealing documents I'd seen before and others that were new. Dmitri's dead, but his bosses aren't. The Castellis are wounded but not destroyed. And somewhere out there, children are still being trafficked through shipping routes I once controlled. And do you think I'll help you? After everything you've lied about? I think you'll help me because it's what your father would have wanted. His storm glass eyes held mine, and because you're the only person left who can make sure his death meant something. Outside the windows, the sun was rising over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of fire and hope. I thought about my father, about the choice he'd made to trust a dangerous man with a guilty conscience, about the choice I had to make now. "Show me everything," I said finally. "Every document, every connection, every piece of evidence we need to end this." Venerando's smile was sharp as a blade, but for the first time since I'd met him, it felt like justice. 6 weeks later, I stood in the marble lobby of the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan, watching FBI agents escort the last of the Castelli lieutenants through a gauntlet of reporters and camera crews. The headlines would write themselves: "Massive trafficking ring dismantled. Decades-old corruption exposed. Justice for the forgotten." But the real victory was quieter, more personal. It was the knowledge that my father's evidence, combined with Venerando's insider testimony and the digital records we'd recovered from Marco before the FBI found him, had finally accomplished what Thomas Hillyer had died trying to achieve. "It's over," Salvatore said, appearing at my elbow with the silent efficiency that had once terrified me and now felt oddly comforting. "The last of the Russian connections were arrested this morning in Brighton Beach." I nodded, watching the news crews pack up their equipment. "And the children?" 43 rescued from various locations, all being processed through proper channels, reunited with families where possible. His voice carried the satisfaction of a man who'd helped right an old wrong. "Your father would be proud." The words should have brought comfort, but instead they highlighted the hollow space where triumph should have been. We'd won, but the victory felt incomplete somehow. Maybe because justice, when it finally came, was always smaller than the crime it was meant to answer. "Where is he?" I asked. Salvatore didn't need to ask who I meant. "Waiting for you. The estate in the Hamptons." The drive took 2 hours through autumn countryside that looked like something from a magazine. Rolling hills painted in gold and crimson, estates hidden behind stone walls and ancient trees. Venerando's property sat on 50 acres overlooking the Atlantic, a sprawling compound that managed to feel both fortress-like and welcoming. I found him on the terrace, watching waves crash against the private beach below. He'd traded his usual expensive suits for jeans and a cashmere sweater, but somehow looked more dangerous in casual clothes than he ever had in armor of Italian silk. "You came," he said without turning around. "You asked me to. I asked you to consider an offer. There's a difference." He gestured to a chair beside him, and I sat, accepting the glass of wine he poured from a bottle that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "What kind of offer?" "The kind that comes with choices." Venerando finally looked at me, his storm glass eyes reflecting the afternoon light. "You've spent 6 weeks helping me dismantle a criminal empire. You've seen things, done things that most people couldn't handle. The question is, what do you want to do with that experience?" I sipped the wine, tasting complexity and age, and the kind of craftsmanship that came from generations of tradition. "I want to go back to my life." "Do you?" His smile was knowing, almost sad. "Because the Victoria Hillyer who walked into that conference room 6 weeks ago doesn't exist anymore. She was replaced by someone stronger, someone who's seen how the world really works." "And what's that supposed to mean?" "It means you have options now." Venerando stood and moved to the terrace railing, his hands gripping the stone like he was anchoring himself against strong winds. "Option 1. I arrange a new identity, A clean background, enough money to start over anywhere in the world. You disappear, become someone else, live a quiet life far from all of this. The offer was tempting in its simplicity. A chance to escape, to pretend the last 6 weeks had been nothing more than a nightmare. But even as I considered it, I knew it wasn't what I wanted. What's option 2? Option 2 is more complicated. He turned to face me, his expression serious. Russo Holdings is going legitimate. Completely, permanently, irreversibly legitimate. But that transition requires someone with legal expertise, someone who understands both sides of the law. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a partnership. The distinction was important, and we both knew it. Equal say in all major decisions, equal share in all profits, equal responsibility for making sure we never again become what we once were. I set down my wine glass, my hands suddenly unsteady. Why? Because you changed everything. His voice was quiet, intense. 6 weeks ago, I was a man trying to atone for past sins by destroying other people's crimes. But you showed me something different. You showed me what it looks like to build something instead of just tearing things down. I don't know anything about running a shipping company. You know about justice. You know about doing the right thing even when it's dangerous. He moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, see the flecks of silver in his eyes. You know about standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. The offer hung between us like a bridge across an impossible chasm. On one side was safety, anonymity, the chance to pretend I'd never learned how dark the world could be. On the other side was partnership with a man who'd lied to me, protected me, and shown me depths of myself I'd never known existed. There's a third option, I said finally. Is there? I stay, but on my terms. I stood to face him directly, drawing on reserves of courage I'd discovered in warehouse confrontations and federal courtrooms. If I'm going to help you build something legitimate, then it has to be completely legitimate. No gray areas, no convenient exceptions, no just this once compromises. Agreed. And I want to expand beyond shipping. Legal aid clinics, victim advocacy programs, resources for people who've been trafficked or exploited. I was thinking out loud now, seeing possibilities I'd never imagined before. Use the money we make to help people who are where I was 6 weeks ago, powerless, invisible, forgotten. Venerando's smile was slow, genuine, transformative. Your father would be proud. My father would be terrified, I corrected, but he'd understand. The sun was setting over the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of fire and possibility. Below us, waves crashed against the shore with the kind of relentless persistence that eventually wore down even the hardest stone. So, Venerando asked, partners? I thought about the woman I'd been 6 weeks ago, invisible, silent, content to file other people's paperwork and pretend the world was fair. Then I thought about the woman I'd become, someone who'd faced down killers and federal agents, someone who'd helped bring justice to forgotten victims, someone who'd learned that sometimes the right choice was also the dangerous one. Partners, I agreed, and felt something shift inside me like tectonic plates finding new alignment. He extended his hand, and I shook it, sealing a bargain that felt like stepping into a new life. Outside the windows, the city lights were beginning to twinkle in the distance. 8 million people living their lives, most of them unaware that the world had just become a slightly more just place. Half this city belongs to me, Venerando said quietly, his hand still holding mine. The other half just became yours. I looked out at the lights, at the vast complexity of human hopes and dreams and struggles, and realized I was no longer afraid of the responsibility. I was ready for it.